These are key moments in the Israel-Iran war, and the Iranian regime might collapse. But what would happen then? That's the big question, because this will affect you too, even if you're across the globe, and you'll soon see why. Here, we're going to hear from a Middle East expert, Debbie Mohnblatt, who has her first degree in Middle Eastern Studies and journalism. In fact, she was a journalist and correspondent on Middle East and North Africa issues. Her second degree is in national security and maritime strategy, and in the army, she was a coordinator of governmental activities in the territories. For me, that's one of the top sectors when it comes to Israeli diplomacy in the army. And Debbie is the host. She's the host of a podcast called It's Lull in the Middle East. I'll leave it in the description so you can learn more about these topics. In the strategic, political, historical sense, in every field, I think it's one of the most comprehensive podcasts and shows about the Middle East. And Debbie, welcome to this channel. I want to ask you the first question. And the question is, if the Iranian regime falls, does the conflict in the Middle East end? Or maybe it's the beginning of a phase of chaos for the Middle East?
Hello, Yaakov. How are you? It's a pleasure to be here with your listeners. And well, this is the million-dollar question, right? But it's important to put ourselves in the historical context we've been in since December of last year. The protests in Iran have been shaking the country for almost a month now. And the Iranian regime feels very, very threatened. That's why it has been suppressing the protests and has killed more than 50,000 people in Iran. This is a topic that doesn't come up much in the news, and the reason why is another subject we can talk about someday, but yes, at this moment. American analysts have said that the Iranian regime is at its weakest point since 1979, since the Iranian Revolution, when the theocrats came to power. Now, if the Iranian regime falls, this wouldn't be like an on and off switch where suddenly there would be world peace just because the Iranian regime falls. Instead, this would be a domino effect of many things that could have and could be very significant in several areas. So it needs to be analyzed a bit more, usually by individual topics. We saw this in several Middle Eastern countries. When power falls, when, for example, dictatorial leaders fell, like Gaddafi in Libya or like Saddam Hussein in Iraq, what historically happens in the Middle East is that internal chaos breaks out in the country. We have to remember that many of the countries in the Middle East, including Iran, are countries that have a lot of mixed ethnic groups within the country. Because the borders were drawn by colonial powers without any consideration for the ethnic groups living in each place, they just drew countries and left several ethnic groups mixed together, grouped in different areas. So when a dictator who is oppressing these ethnic groups falls, what happens is that chaos often breaks out, and these ethnic groups often try either to settle scores with each other or to take power over the rest or to have their own independence. So this would be a power vacuum that can stir up that chaos. So the important thing is that if the Iranian regime is overthrown, there needs to be a very clear plan about what will happen next.
Of course, in fact, some time ago, we also talked about this on your channel, It's Lil, about how the Middle East is not structured like Western countries. I invite the audience to briefly remove their Western perspective and view the conflict through Middle Eastern lenses, seeing it as a struggle of ethnicities and religions with greater complexity. And here comes my next question. In this context, what if the regime were to fall, really fall? We know that Iran has a huge arsenal of weapons, long-range missiles, a very lethal army. Who would end up with all this? Which group for now could be the most dominant, or who would take control of all this arsenal?
This is a very big problem, and I think that's why countries like the United States haven't gone ahead and overthrown the Iranian regime, because that's the most important question. Iran has one of the largest armies with the biggest arsenals in the entire Middle East, and it also doesn't have a nuclear weapon yet, but it's on its way and has ballistic missiles that can carry these nuclear warheads to the other side of the world. If you want proof of that, you can look at the war in June against Israel, where Iran launched hundreds of ballistic missiles, and all of these are capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. So we're talking about a very, very delicate arsenal, and the big problem is that this arsenal is not controlled by the Iranian army. This arsenal is currently controlled by the Revolutionary Guard. What is the Revolutionary Guard? It's very important to understand all of this. When the Iranian Revolution happened in 1979 and the Ayatollahs came to power, they created something like an army above the Iranian army, which is called the Revolutionary Guard. That's exactly what it is, as the name suggests. It's in charge of protecting the Islamic Revolution, meaning it's responsible for protecting the Ayatollahs and all their interests. So if the Ayatollahs fall, this arsenal would go directly into the hands of the Revolutionary Guard. So instead of seeing a cleric with turbans, we're going to see a general, but he might have the same ideas or even more extreme ones than the clerics. And having all this arsenal in their hands could be very dangerous. I want to clarify that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard is already designated a terrorist organization by the European Union, the United States, Israel, and several other countries worldwide. So even though the Iranian government is also a terrorist regime, if it falls, it would be left under the group that protects it, the military group that protects it, which is also a terrorist group. So this is a very super delicate issue. If Western countries get involved in toppling the Iranian regime, they have to be very careful and try to prevent this arsenal from falling into the hands of the Revolutionary Guards again.
Of course. And for the audience, just to give you a comparison, I don't know if you remember when they captured Maduro, who was protecting Maduro? Was it a Venezuelan squad? No, it was a Cuban squad, because that's the model of those dictatorships. You take an external agent to protect you from the people who are dissatisfied. The same way in Iran, they use an agent that is external to, let's say, the military monopoly of Iran. And this is the Revolutionary Guard. It's like a sub-army that protects them. And it's one of the many signs that it's a dictatorship. It's really crazy. Yes. They are declared as a terrorist group by the world. It means that Iran is basically controlled and could fall into the hands of an organization that is considered terrorist worldwide. Speaking of terrorist organizations, there's another organization called Hezbollah, which is an organization that's in Lebanon. Maybe you can talk a bit more about this, but I wanted to ask you if Hezbollah, which shares a border in the conflict with Israel because Iran is several thousand kilometers away, but Hezbollah is very close. And they are a proxy of Iran, meaning like a satellite group that Iran uses to attack Israel. If Iran were to fall, at least it wouldn't be good news here, since those who depend financially on Iran, maybe this flow of money. If it ends, then Hezbollah would disintegrate. What would happen to Hezbollah?
On one hand, yes, and on the other hand, no. We have to understand a little bit about what Hezbollah is to put things into context. Lebanon is a country that has a fairly large proportion of Shiites, like the clerics in Iran, compared to other countries in the Middle East where the vast majority are Sunni. In Lebanon, 1/3 are Shiite. When in 1979, the regime of the Ayatollahs came to power in Iran and created the Revolutionary Guard to protect the regime. They also dedicated themselves to what was called exporting the revolution. The first place where they exported the Shiite Muslim revolution was Lebanon. They saw a perfect opportunity because Lebanon at that time was in a sectarian civil war, Sunnis against Shiites against Christians. So they went to the Shiites and told them, we're going to create a group called Hezbollah, which will have exactly the same ideologies as the Iranian Revolution. And we're going to give them money, we're going to arm them, and we're going to help them take power. Since 1981, when Hezbollah was created, 2 years after the Iranian regime came to power, and up to today, Iran has been supporting Hezbollah with a lot of money and a lot of weapons. Now, lately, Hezbollah has become much weaker for several reasons. The first is the economic crisis in Iran. Okay, Iran has significantly cut its flow of money. They're still giving them some, but they've cut back a lot. The second is the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria. Why is this so important? Because Syria and Iraq are the countries that connect Iran and Hezbollah by land. And so all the arms supplies went through Syria because Bashar al-Assad was an ally of these two groups, both Hezbollah and the Iranian government, as well as the Iranian regime. When it falls, they disconnect. Conectados terrestremente, que es súper importante. Hezbollah was created using baptismal, which ixopatera. No ha sabido diversificar sus ingresos, ¿ok? Entonces sí, recibe una suma absurda. Technically, it involves about 200 million a year to Hezbollah. But Hezbollah has also managed to set up its own businesses to survive in case this flow of money is cut off. For example, the trafficking of the drug Captagon, This is a drug that is produced in Syrian territory, but Hezbollah controls the production and distribution to several Middle Eastern countries and also to Europe. Right now, there are countries in the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, that are dealing with this problem because their young people are becoming addicted to this drug, to Captagon, and all of this is filling Hezbollah's pockets. Also, in fact, fun fact, on October 7th, when the Hamas terrorist attack against the Israeli population happened, they found traces of Captagon in many of the terrorists. This is a euphoric drug. It's a bit like cocaine. So we can see how far-reaching Captagon is. And also, Hezbollah has its drug trafficking operations in Latin America. It has several businesses in the tri-border area and also throughout Venezuela. And business with groups, for example, like the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. So Hezbollah does have an economic support network, which is currently a minority of its income. But if the flow from Iran is cut off, they will increase it more.
Starting with exporting the revolution, because Iran, as we know, aspires to have Islamic hegemony. And recently there was an interview with an Iranian leader who said that they tried to export the Islamic revolution to Japan and they weren't able to convert people. He said they invested millions in Japan, but only a foreigner converted there. That wasn't the case, for example, in Lebanon. Lebanon was a country with a Christian majority, and they managed to gain such control that now Christians in Lebanon feel threatened. And precisely the topic he touches on is that the expansion of the Islamic revolution also came in through evil means. The revolution is one of the reasons why people in Latin America see us, of course, in Spain, but also in America. There are cells over there that have been found in Barcelona, Hezbollah cells and so on, but those who see us in Latin America also there in Hezbollah. There are generals, for example, in Colombia, I remember since I was a child reporting and shouting, banging on the table, pointing out that there are cells in the north of Colombia, in areas like Guajira. So if this is a topic that concerns them a lot, I would like to ask you then, let's say they are weakened, that now they are at their weakest point, but they become even weaker financially before they manage to expand their business, drug trafficking, to keep going. It could be that Lebanon, since we have this Christian minority that fought against them at one point, and other groups like Russians and Arabs of all kinds, Sunnis, could it be that Lebanon regains its sovereignty, like getting rid of Hezbollah, and there being some kind of internal civil war to free Lebanon from, let's say, the government that Hezbollah has over them?
Yes, we first need to understand what Hezbollah's position in Lebanon is today. First of all of southern Lebanon, below what is called the Litani River, which is a river that cuts across Lebanon from east to west, everything that is south of southern Lebanon is controlled by Hezbollah. People pay taxes to Hezbollah, this terrorist group, and there are also Russian minorities mainly, but also Muslim Sunnis and also Christians who live under the Hezbollah regime. In addition to that, Hezbollah has managed to position itself politically in Lebanon. Hezbollah is a political party and is part of the Lebanese parliament. Now, the Lebanese army. And another important thing to understand is that Hezbollah is the most heavily armed non-governmental group in the world and sometimes surpasses the level of weaponry, and that they have more than other national armies in the world, like, for example, the Lebanese army. So does this mean that Hezbollah has more weapons and more arsenal than the Lebanese army? And their soldiers are very well trained because many have been trained by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and they have a very well designed army. So is this a problem? But now this is indeed their weakest point, and the Lebanese army is very eager to recover the south of Lebanon. And for Hezbollah to disarm, obviously it's not going to happen through negotiation. Hezbollah does not want to disarm. So what the Lebanese army needs is external help. It needs help from countries that have already said they will help, like, for example, the United States. Or, for example, France, which is a country that has always been very involved in Lebanon's dynamics. They have said they are going to help strengthen the Lebanese army, but this is now. Since we are walking on a tightrope, we could fall to either side. Either Hezbollah grows its business and gets back on its feet, or the Lebanese army manages to bring them down. We are at that moment right now. It's the decisive moment for that.
Of course, the Hezbollah army is even bigger than that of countries like Germany. They have a much larger missile arsenal and things like that. It's crazy. It's like, for example, in Latin America, if a president who was once in a guerrilla group, or rather, if a former guerrilla becomes president, wink, wink to the countries that already know where I'm going with this, and to another group that's also funded by Iran. Maybe you want to talk, give more details, but it's the Houthis in Yemen, and Yemen has been in a civil war for a while now. It's divided in two, and one part belongs to the Houthis. What impact would the Houthis have if Iran falls? Because this is important for people, reach into your pocket and take out your mobile device. These kinds of goods and many more reach you through Europe and to Europe from Asia, thanks to a passage that goes through Yemen. And the Houthis often act like pirates, stealing those goods so they don't reach you. Your products become more expensive because if the goods are stolen, the ones that do arrive are sold at a higher price to compensate. So do the Houthis also affect you? But what would happen today? If Iran falls, would it have an impact on Yemen?
We have to understand that the Houthis are a group, they're a proxy group of Iran, like, for example, Hezbollah and the Shia groups in Iraq and so on. But it's Iran's proxy group, less independent ideologically, but more independent technologically and militarily. What does this mean that when it comes to ideology, they're aligned on things like common enemies, like, for example, Israel or Saudi Arabia? But there are many things in the ideology that don't align. But it is the most independent proxy group from Iran when it comes to weapons and technology. All the time, Iran is sending shipments of weapons or missile parts. It's sending Revolutionary Guard officers to help them build their own missile factories, but they're still super independent. So if the Iranian regime falls, that would definitely cut off the supply of weapons to the Houthis. So would they go back to being this tribal group with aspirations for separatism and independence from Yemen's internationally recognized government? But for me, I think it could stop being a global threat. What the Houthis have been doing, as you just mentioned, is closing the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It's very important because it shortens by weeks, if not months, if I'm not mistaken, the maritime transit from Asia to Europe. Because most ships want to cross through Bab el-Mandeb to reach the Suez Canal and exit into the Mediterranean Sea. And if the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is blocked, then what they have to do is go all the way around Africa, below South Africa, and that way reach the Mediterranean and get to Europe. So what the Houthis have done to apply global pressure is attack and drive out any kind of cargo ship that passes through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, closing it, almost completely closing it over these years, and this has driven up the prices of everything. I don't know if this has reached you or affected you, but if the Iranian regime falls, this would be quite immediate. The Houthis would stop receiving supplies of advanced weapons.
Didn't you mention the Iranian regime? There are more global tests, right? But I wanted to ask you about that, okay? Are there many Iranians who, through what you mentioned, the Venezuela-Iran alliance, have come to Latin America? What would happen to them? Are they already in Latin America, or is it the other way around? In World War II, many Nazis fled to Latin America after the regime fell. Many were hosted in countries like Argentina at the time. And a similar scenario could happen with Iran. They might seek refuge in Latin America, where they're still warmly welcomed.
I think so. Nowadays, there are many governments, not many, but some governments in Latin America that are aligned with the regime. In Tehran, for example, Venezuela, a month ago nowadays, with the fall of Maduro, the scenario is a little different. But for example, Nicaragua and for example, Cuba, these are countries that have visa-free agreements with Iran. And besides, what Venezuela did in the past can have a big impact now. What did Venezuela do in the past? During all these years, Venezuela has been giving Venezuelan passports to people from the Revolutionary Guards and to people from Hezbollah also. So does that mean that now all these people are Iranians, but they're also Venezuelans? So would this give them a much bigger door to enter Latin America? And this is something that Latin American countries have to keep very much in mind in case the Iranian regime falls.
Actually, I'd like to share a story with the audience and you, David. I'm not sure if I've told you. In one of my former neighborhoods in Israel, there are many Iranians. And it's not just about Jews who lived in Iran and came, but Iranians, real Iranians. Why are they there? Because they helped Israel during all these decades of war, because there are many Iranians who hate the regime. The majority, and many help Israel and are in contact with the Mossad. And so That's why when they help, sometimes they get discovered and have to escape from Iran. The Mossad helps them escape, which is why some are in Israel. Interesting, right? I'm just sharing info, not locations. But also the other way around, with governments like Evo's, Manners at the time, and all of this very friendly with Iran. They start hosting people from the Iranian dictatorship in their countries. And it's the kind of people who know, because the Iranian regime fell, they end their utopian religious aspiration, continue with the same madness, and keep trying to revive that desire to spread terror in the world. So just to be careful, but to wrap things up, David, if the Iranian regime falls, is it possible that this Iranian society, if we can even talk about an Iranian society, right? If there is something homogeneous there, or is Iranian society much more complex? Could Iranian society create a secular or non-religious democracy, unlike what it is now? Or am I being too optimistic? In general, when we get excited about the news that the regime might fall, maybe it won't turn out to be the country we're all hoping for.
I imagine you're asking this based on what happened, for example, in Iraq, where the United States thought there could be a democracy and that was a failed attempt, or in Afghanistan, for example. But I want to say that Iran is a bit different from the rest of the Middle Eastern countries. Iran has the population, one of the most educated populations. It has more than 90% of people who can read and write, and a lot of people with university degrees. And the vast majority, I would dare to say more than 80%, hate the regime and consider themselves secular. I also want to say that Iranians are not Arabs, Iranians are Persians, and this is an ancient culture with a lot of history and a lot of culture. And in fact, we do know about the democratic aspirations that the Iranian people have had. More than 100 years ago, during the 1906 revolution, they were trying to form a parliament and were trying to take democratic steps. So I think that, yes, I think Iran it doesn't follow the same path as all these other Middle Eastern countries where it has been impossible to bring democracy. I think Iran is a very different country, much more secular and much more educated, that it could actually have some kind of democratic transition again. All of this has to be handled with a lot of intelligence in order to achieve that result.
I'm glad to hear you talk about that happy ending we could have. I would also love for Israel to be at peace with Iran again, like it was before. And thank you, David. I'm going to leave the audience here wanting to know more about the topic. I'll leave the link in the description so you can also visit the channel to the SLIL podcast in the Middle East, which is the podcast where David is the host. And there you'll be able to hear a lot about these topics, especially about the countries that have been mentioned. David has podcasts, so you're also invited to check them out. And thank you very much for participating.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having this conversation.